All right, whoa, good morning. I apologize, I'm having a little trouble with my asthma this morning, so I may have to stop and use my inhaler. So, hey, I'm Casey, good morning. I think traditional drug lectures have been, don't do drugs, and that was kind of it. That's really not my message today. I've been in the ER for about 10 years. I've been doing addiction medicine for a couple of years. I was just looking at my patients. This sounds kind of silly, but I text with my patients a lot and just their struggles. You know, fentanyl, meth, opiates, alcohol, fentanyl and meth, fentanyl, more fentanyl, more meth. My patients really struggle. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through some various facts about alcohol, cannabis, vaping. We'll just go through kind of just what I feel like is good information to know. If you have a question, just ask. You can read tons of stuff on the internet. Some of it's very good, some of it's not. But my only goal here is just to give you knowledge. So with that, we'll get started. The first thing is we're going to talk about drugs, and I'm going to show you drug paraphernalia. Some of you probably know someone who's had an overdose, or you know someone who struggled with addiction. If you need to kind of check in emotionally, please do. Okay, I apologize to the folks in the back, because you probably can't see this, but this is a map of where overdoses occur in Monterey County. So, did it just die? Looks like it just died. Oh, I turned, wait for it. There we go. I turned it off when I jumped. Okay, here's the Monterey Peninsula. Here's Seaside. Here's Marina. Here's Salinas. And that's South County. My house is like right there. So if you're wondering where overdoses occur, the answer is everywhere. So I grew up in PG, and I didn't think we had overdoses. It's unfortunately really changed. And as an addiction doctor, it's scary. I talked with a doctor up in San Francisco, and they're testing the drug supply. We're finding 2 new drugs a week. 2 new drugs a week. I can talk about that if you're interested. A lot of what I do as an addiction doctor is I talk to people about what they've lived through. So this is a painting painted by a friend of mine. If you've heard me speak before, I always show it. His name was Paul. He grew up in Carmel. And this is what he felt life was like living with addiction. And unfortunately, he died in 2019 of an overdose. And I promised his family I would honor him, that I'd tell his story. And if I go to any 3rd grade class in Monterey County right now and I say, who wants to be a doctor when they grow up? Who wants to be a professional football player when they grow up? Who wants to be addicted in Chinatown and Salinas shooting fentanyl in a tent? Like, I don't get any takers. I have a lot of homeless patients, unfortunately. There's always a story. So the reason I bring this up is Paul was my friend. Like, we'd go to coffee. He was a nice guy. And yet, he had horrible addiction and died of an overdose. So I always want to honor him. All right, so let's talk about why am I here today? Okay, why am I here at a high school? It's actually probably a little bit better for middle schools. I kind of missed that when I first started. But so what you do today matters in terms of how your brain responds to different substances. Okay, so I think my youngest patient, or not the youngest patient, but when I ask people, like, what age did you start using drugs or alcohol? The youngest response I got was 6. Yeah, I had a person who started drinking alcohol at 6. She's pretty unusual. Most of my patients start using drugs and alcohol between like 11 and 15, which fits, right? Some of you in the audience are already using. I go to middle schools, and sometimes the middle school students are already using. Here's why this matters. So the way your brain is developing, right now it's growing faster than at any other time in your life. So if we start using drugs at 13 or earlier, 2/3 of us will develop a long-term problem with drugs and alcohol, and medically I call that addiction, okay? So there's what, like, I don't know, 400 people in this room? That's like what, 250? 700? Oh wow, so much for my math. All right, let's say 500. So let's say like kind of everybody, but like this chunk up in the front, if we all decide we're going to use drugs and alcohol today, that whole back, that whole side, all develops addiction. Now, if you wait until 21, the risk of addiction drops to less than 1 in 10. So if you're going to drink tonight, that will affect your long-term relationship with alcohol. Let me give you an example. So I'm working in the ER 2 Thanksgivings ago. And a guy checks into the ER and says, I have a problem with alcohol. And I'm like, okay, go in. He was in room 44. I always remember the room patients were in. I'm like, hey, I'm Dr. Grover. Nice to meet you. What's going on? And he said, you know, doc, I've been drinking. I haven't been eating. And he had addiction to alcohol, so he can't control his use. He can't stop when he wants to. And he'd basically done nothing except drink alcohol for about a week. You can imagine that's not good for you. He ended up having a bunch of problems I had to fix with IV medications. And anyways, I got him feeling better. He went into the hospital. On the day he was leaving, he said, hey, doc, you know, next week is Thanksgiving. Can I have a beer with my sister on Thanksgiving? And I thought, well, that's pretty reasonable, right? Alcohol is legal for adults. It's Thanksgiving. A lot of adults drink beer when they watch football on Thanksgiving. And it's a family member. And I told him, you know, sir, I don't think you can drink alcohol and just have one. And he was like, no, doc, I got it. It's going to be no problem. And I said, if I were a betting man, I would bet I'm going to see you back in the ER if you decide to drink on Thanksgiving. And he was like, I'm just going to have one beer. It's only going to be one beer. And we kind of agreed to disagree. So anyways, he goes home. Exactly 1 week later, same room, ER number 44, same patient, same problem, alcohol. And I looked at him, I said, what happened? And he said, hey doc, you were right. That one beer turned into 20 every day for the last week. And I feel bad for the guy, right? Many of you see adults enjoying alcohol. It's a legal substance. But he started at an age, I think he started around 11 or 12. His brain no longer can have just one drink. It's always 20. So I guess my message here is if you look at things that are legal for adults like cannabis or alcohol and you want to use them responsibly as an adult, then don't use today. Wait. Okay. Let's start with alcohol. So for an entire year in the ER, I actually just kind of wanted to see which drug is the biggest problem. So I counted. I have a book. We get little stickers of patients when they check in. And so for an entire year, every time I took care of a patient with an addiction, I saved their sticker and wrote down the substance they used. Alcohol was number one, about half. And I think I ended up seeing, I don't know, I averaged like 5 a shift. It was several hundred, if not over 1,000 patients. Alcohol is number one. So first question to the group, and if you don't want to volunteer, please don't worry about it. Quick poll from the group. Which of the following types of alcohol is most likely to get a person intoxicated, also known as drunk? Beer? Wine? Wait for it. Liquor.
Oh my God.
Thank you for participating, by the way. So the answer is yes. It's actually not liquor. It's all three. So here's the medical answer. So it turns out, for me as a doctor, there is something called a standard drink. Okay? Don't remember this. It's 14 grams of ethanol. Ethanol being the medical word for alcohol. So one 5% beer in a 12-ounce can is one drink. Okay? One 5-ounce glass of wine at 12% alcohol is one drink. And one 1.5-ounce shot of 40% liquor is a drink. Now, you don't have to worry about remembering those, but what I want you to know is when you decide to drink, the percentage and the size make a big difference, okay? Let's say you find a 10% beer. That's not one drink, that's now two. And adults seem to have this idea that as long as it's a single glass, it's a single drink. So some of my patients basically fill their glass full of liquor. They're like, doc, it's only one drink, but it's actually 8 different shots of alcohol, which counts as 8 drinks. So if you decide you're going to drink tonight or you're going to drink this weekend, the percentage of alcohol and the size makes a difference. The other thing is alcohol really varies. This is called Everclear. This is 95% alcohol. It's essentially pure alcohol. So I don't know if you guys have heard of, jungle juice and kind of party punch. Basically, people take a bowl and usually It's people trying to get as drunk as possible. So if you pour this stuff in, it becomes really hard to measure how much alcohol you're actually getting. So why does liquor tend to make people the most drunk? Is because people tend to pour like this, right? As opposed to a beer, you open it up, it's a single can, that's all you get. So I think my message to you again is if you're gonna party this weekend, if you're gonna drink tonight, if you're, pay attention, what's the percentage? Is it 1 drink? Is it 2 drinks? Is it 5 drinks? So, next thing we're going to talk about is blood alcohol concentration, and I apologize for this silly graphic from Google. I'm going to get up on the stage again here. Okay, so when we measure alcohol, we do what's called a blood alcohol concentration, or BAC. Okay, so right now, I've had no alcohol today, right? Good thing. I'm at 0. Okay, when people have maybe like 1 to 3 drinks, their alcohol level goes from 0 to 0.1. That's actually the range in which most adults drink alcohol. This is kind of like the social range. People feel like jokes are a little bit funnier. They feel like they can talk more to people. That's where most adults tend to drink. Okay, once you get to this range of 0.1, you start to lose brain functions. You'll lose the ability to speak clearly. If you've ever seen someone who's really drunk and they slur their speech, that's why. You lose the ability to walk in a straight line. You've seen people stagger. That's why if people are accused of being drunk while they're driving, the cops make them get out of the car and walk. Okay? And then the last thing is you also lose the ability to form new memories. That part of the brain that remembers things starts to not function. Have you ever heard of a blackout? Basically, someone drinks enough that they don't remember anything. Okay, so here, now we get to 0.2. This is really where most people fall asleep and vomit. We get this all the time in the ER. We probably get, I think I counted, I think we get like somewhere between 1 and 5 ambulances a day of somebody who just drank too much. Okay, this is the range 0.2 and higher that we start to get into some danger of alcohol, okay? So between 0.2 and 0.3, most people will fall asleep and vomit, and that's good because when you fall asleep, you can't drink any more alcohol. And if you vomit, you get some of the alcohol out and you don't drink more, okay? Above 0.3 is the danger zone. That's where people start to go into a stupor. A stupor is where you can't wake them up. And then all the way up here at the top, I can't even reach that high, 0.4 is where death can happen, and we'll talk about it. And then beyond that is 0.5. For the average person, that will kill them. But like I said, most people don't get there because they either fall asleep or vomit. Now, when people drink a lot regularly, their body gets used to it. I had a patient last week who was at 0.5 awake and talking. I have never seen one that high before. Poor thing, she has a really bad addiction to alcohol. So what's also important to know is that for the men and women in the room, alcohol affects each of us differently between the two sexes, okay? So let's go through this. This is called a BAC calculator. You can literally just Google BAC calculator and you can put in yourself and see what's gonna happen. Like you can literally put in, I'm male, I'm 170 pounds, and this is how many shots I have over 2 hours. Sometimes I actually do it in the ER just to get a sense of like, how much did this person actually drink, okay? So this experiment is a male at 155 pounds that has 4 beers in 2 hours, okay? You can see up at the top of the screen, that number gets to 0.08. So that's in that low range. Okay? However, it turns out that men and women digest alcohol differently. Men have an enzyme in their stomach that breaks down alcohol while women do not. So women actually absorb alcohol faster and better than men. So, same experiment. This is now female, 155 pounds, 4 beers in 2 hours. Take a look up at the top of the screen. Now we're at 0.09. There's more to the story though. How you're built, your physical size affects how you break down alcohol as well. So let's do me. So I am Actually, I'm 185 pounds, and I'm male, and I drink 4 beers in 2 hours. Okay? Take a look at the top of the screen. My alcohol level is 0.06. Okay? Girls in the room, this one's really important. Now, we're going to pick on my wife. 120 pounds, female, 4 beers in 2 hours. Take a look at that blood alcohol concentration, 0.13. So the woman is twice as drunk as the guy for the same amount of alcohol. So for the girls in the room, drinking is very social. People like to drink shit and go drink for drink. You have a drink, I have a drink. You have a drink, I have a drink. If my wife and I drink 2 drinks together, she is twice as intoxicated as I am. Okay. People have probably heard sorry, stupid asthma. Okay, alcohol poisoning. People have probably heard of this. What is alcohol poisoning? So alcohol poisoning is not really a precise medical term, but essentially what it is somebody drinks enough that alcohol makes them sick. Okay? Remember I mentioned as people drink, they tend to get sleepy and vomit. That's a lot of what we see. These are some of the symptoms. The person won't wake up, they may vomit, they may not be breathing right. So yeah, basically you're drinking with friends and all of a sudden your friend won't wake up on the couch and they start vomiting. That's alcohol poisoning. Like I said, we get somewhere between 1 and 5 ambulances a day in the ER for this. And absolutely, call 911. We're going to talk about when this gets a lot more dangerous in just a second. Now, if you call 911 and you're partying and you're drinking underage, when the cops get there with the ambulance, you're not in trouble. It's called the Good Samaritan Law. We have had, and it breaks my heart, we have had teenagers in this community die when they were using or drinking and there was a medical emergency and they didn't call 911 because they were afraid that the cops were going to bust them. So it is called the Good Samaritan Law. If you are partying tonight or this weekend, please call 911 if you suspect one of your friends has alcohol poisoning. Okay, last bit on alcohol. So, can you overdose on alcohol? Yeah, the answer is yes. I apologize, this is kind of a gory photo. I'm going to get up here again. So, this is a picture of a 15-year-old girl on life support from alcohol. Now, I want to be very honest. I am not trying to scare you. I have never seen this in my 10 years as a doctor in the ER. But it can happen, and I want you to know how it happens, so when you decide to drink, you can know kind of how this process works. So this girl, she's in a hospital bed. Okay, in the back you probably can't see this, but this is a tube going into her mouth because she stopped breathing. She's got a collar on her neck because she fell. She basically passed out from all the alcohol. And then you can see here, this tubing basically goes to a breathing machine for her. So remember I mentioned that it's actually kind of hard to overdose on alcohol because people tend to get sleepy and vomit. This circumstance can happen. And basically what this is the result of is this person's alcohol level goes up so fast that the body can't really respond. So this person goes from green to red over like 1 to 2 hours. So this particular family didn't talk about what actually happened except that she was a 15-year-old at a sleepover and ended up on life support. But what I think happened based on my review of this is the type of person who drank probably 10 to 15 drinks in 1 to 2 hours. And what happens is that alcohol level goes up so fast that your body doesn't have time to fall asleep. It doesn't have time to vomit. It just eventually gets to a point where the alcohol level is so high that the person loses consciousness and stops breathing. Again, I'm going to be very honest. I have never seen this in 10 years. However, there are cases of this happening. So if you're drinking this weekend and your buddy is just slamming alcohol shots back to back, see if you can get him to slow down. This again comes from really, really rapid heavy alcohol consumption. Or in other cases, it can happen where somebody drinks a lot and just doesn't have as much nausea or vomiting. Okay, I think that's it on alcohol. Any questions on alcohol? All right, okay, next one we're going to talk about is vaping. And hopefully you'll find this interesting. It's just kind of interesting, the history of it. So this is a schematic of the original vape device. The original vape devices were meant to look like cigarettes. In fact, they were actually called cigalikes because they look so much like cigarettes. So you can see it's even colored like a Camel cigarette, right? It's got the kind of the tan butt, and then the paper roll is white. And essentially, it's a really simple design. Vaping is simply a technology, okay? So what's in it? Essentially, you have a battery to make power. You have an atomizer. It's a little device that kind of makes the vapor. It's a heating element. And then you have a little chamber that holds the liquid. That's it. I mean, you could truly put water in a vapor device and make steam. It's not very complicated. Now, what you put in the device is very different, which we'll talk about in just a sec. Okay. Again, I apologize to the folks in the back because you probably can't see this. But this is basically the evolution of vape over the last 15 years. So e-cigarettes have only been around since like 2006, 2007. They actually came out in Asia a little bit before they did here in the US. But the original one was basically designed to try to make a safer cigarette, right? For every cigarette you smoke, you shorten your life by 11 minutes. Think about that. And cigarettes kill 450,000 Americans every year. So people were like, hey, can we make a safer cigarette? That's where this whole thing came from. So as you go from left to right, you can see that the devices get more complicated. There's more options. And then eventually, kind of like many other devices, we try to make them smaller. So on the right, you can see Juul. You guys are familiar with Juul. It's a very kind of thin, slender device. And then now we have the disposable Juul-like devices. But truly, this whole thing just came from wanting to make a safer cigarette. Now, I mentioned that what you put in the vape is really what matters. And there's various terms, e-juice, vape juice, whatever you want to call it. But basically, it contains 4 things, okay? So it contains a drug, nicotine, cannabis, or THC, we'll talk about it. It contains the actual chemical that makes the vapor, ethylene glycol, propylene glycol, or propylene glycerol. If you know those names, we'll come back to that in just a sec. And then it has plant fats called vegetable glycerin, which act like a stabilizing element, and then it has flavors. That's it. 4 basic things, okay? Here's the problem in my mind as a doctor. Propylene glycol and ethylene glycol are antifreeze. Yes, the same chemical we put in our cars to make them not freeze in the winter is what makes the vapor come out. So when you breathe in and you want to see that nice satisfying puff come out, that's hot aerosolized antifreeze. I've never really figured out why this actually isn't more public knowledge, because you'd think that people want to know if they were inhaling aerosolized antifreeze, but I don't know. Okay, what do we know about the safety of vaping? This is the entire world's knowledge of the safety of vaping. Ready? The consequences of chronic e-cigarette aerosol inhalation are largely unknown. We don't know. I may be coming back here in 10 years and being like, guess what, guys? Vaping is amazing. You grow taller, you run faster, and you get a better SAT score. But who knows? We just don't know. For history and comparison, humans have been using tobacco for hundreds of years. We actually didn't really know that cigarettes caused cancer until like the late 70s and 80s. I mean, it took us like 50 years as medical providers to really understand. You can imagine that if somebody starts smoking at 20, they're probably not going to get cancer until they're a lot older. It takes time. So we think that vaping could be safer. We don't know, but we'll see. And also, we really don't know about the long-term effects when the lung is exposed to these antifreeze chemicals. Okay. So remember I mentioned with alcohol, if you decide you're going to drink this weekend, try to figure out how much you're actually going to get in that drink. Did someone hand you a 10% beer? Don't forget that's 2 drinks, right? So if you're going to vape today, I want you to understand a little bit about nicotine and how it's put into vape devices. Okay? So a traditional cigarette is basically a cotton filter, a rolled piece of paper, and then tobacco leaf, right? You light it and it starts to release smoke. When you go to inhale it, you inhale through the butt, so that cotton acts as a filter, so it takes away some of the nicotine and cancer-causing chemicals. But then if you sit there and hold it, it just releases smoke to the atmosphere. So you don't get all the nicotine. That's actually why sometimes people hotbox when they're smoking a joint, because they don't want to waste the smoke into the atmosphere. So when you smoke a traditional cigarette, that cigarette usually contains a certain amount of nicotine, but you only get like a quarter of it. What's interesting is that with vaping, because it's a synthetic liquid, they can customize the amount of nicotine in it. So check this out. On the left, I found this product that is 100 milligrams of nicotine per ml. So one vape cartridge contains the same amount of nicotine as 50 cigarettes. That's 2.5 packs. So again, if you decide you're going to go vape after you're done with my lecture, ask your friend, like, what's the percentage? How much is in it? And the other thing, unfortunately, and I was talking to some students last week, nicotine can make you sick. You guys have probably heard of being Nick sick. Nicotine does have side effects. So we'll come back to quitting nicotine, but nicotine is actually toxic. So remember I mentioned one cigarette, you get about 2 milligrams. This vape liquid has 100 milligrams in it. 40 to 60 milligrams of nicotine is enough to kill a toddler. What does it do? It's actually, what it does is it kind of stimulates various systems in your body. Seizures, difficulty breathing, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. These are signs of nicotine toxicity. We occasionally get it in the ER that like a toddler will find a thing of vape juice and drink it. It can be really bad. So going back to being Nick sick, if you consume too much nicotine, you start to get these side effects. Most often it's nausea, vomiting, kind of stomach upset. When I treat patients for nicotine addiction, I give them a little bit of nicotine so that they don't have withdrawal. And if people don't consume it right, they get sick. They get side effects from the nicotine. So one of the students asked me about this last week, being Nick sick. It's basically you're getting too much nicotine. Now, let's talk about quitting nicotine. So when a person uses a substance once, basically it goes into the body and the body kind of just breaks it down the way it does if you take like a Tylenol or something. Your body has various organs, predominantly the liver and the kidneys, that break down the medicines and chemicals that we get exposed to in life, okay? On the flip side, if you use a substance daily, your brain begins to adjust. It's almost like a thermostat, right? You set it to 70. If it gets too hot, it turns off. If it drops below 70, it turns back on. Your brain is constantly turning up and down various chemical pathways to adjust the chemicals you put into it. So if you use nicotine daily, eventually your brain gets so used to it that when you stop, your brain's out of balance, and that feels like what's called withdrawal. You don't feel good. And so unfortunately, nicotine causes this phenomenon of dependence where your body's used to it and you get sick when you stop. So most people, when they try to quit smoking or quit vaping, really don't feel good, which makes it hard to quit. It takes the average person 9 attempts to quit smoking. 9. So yeah, there are medicines that I use as a doctor to help people stop using nicotine. But I don't know, I'd say of my addiction patients, probably over 50% smoke. It's not as dangerous as fentanyl, for example. So usually I focus on trying to get them off the fentanyl, and then we come back to nicotine products later. All right, any questions about nicotine? Okay, let's go on to cannabis. So cannabis, and you guys have realized by now I'm a huge geek on this stuff, so I think it's interesting, you don't have to think it's interesting. Cannabis has been used by humans for as many as 6,000 years. And cannabis is a substance that actually contains over 400 chemicals. So people think like, oh, it's THC. There's actually a lot more to plant-based cannabis than just the THC. People probably recognize these two names, right? THC, that's what makes people feel high. And then CBD is what we think probably has more of the medicinal benefits. And if you go to a dispensary now, you can get different ratios of THC to CBD. There's various strains of cannabis. I'm mostly going to talk about actually vaping cannabis because when you vape that THC, it's a little bit different. Okay, again, apologies to the back of the room for these small slides. So This is a chart looking at the percentage of THC in cannabis between 1972 and 2008. Traditional cannabis, like that we've been using for thousands of years, is 1% THC. But humans like getting high. I don't know how else to say it, so they bred cannabis to be stronger. Kind of like we now have seedless watermelon. We didn't like the seeds, so we used kind of plant science to breed seedless watermelon. Now we have stronger cannabis. Let's fast forward. By 2015, the average THC in cannabis was 13%, and today cannabis is up to 20% THC. So if you guys ever hear old people be like, when I was younger, cannabis was different. They're actually right. Cannabis in the 1970s was 1/20th as strong as it is today. Now what's interesting is, remember how we mentioned that traditional cigarettes have kind of a fixed amount of nicotine, but when you vape the nicotine, you can get more? It's the same thing with THC. Take a look. This is 96% THC vape juice. So that is the equivalent of 96 joints from 1970. By the way, if you don't know, a joint is essentially a cannabis cigarette. Now, cannabis is also, interestingly, changing. As an addiction doctor and as an ER doctor, I have watched cannabis change even over the last 10 years. So remember we mentioned that people who use nicotine regularly don't feel good when they stop? This idea that you're dependent on nicotine, and when you stop, you feel withdrawal? Cannabis is the same way. I was always taught that cannabis wasn't addictive and you couldn't get hooked on it. It's different now. I have a high schooler in Monterey County that is one of my patients who can't stop using cannabis because of withdrawal symptoms. I have a mom that is one of my patients. She was spending $500 on cannabis a week from a dispensary. She couldn't stop. She got really sick. Fortunately, she's down to about $50 of cannabis a month now. So, what are the symptoms of cannabis withdrawal? I think I can remember all 6. Irritability, restlessness, anxiety, depression, insomnia, meaning you can't sleep, and stomach symptoms. Lots of nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. It's actually interesting, because cannabis withdrawal causes anxiety and depression, it's actually recommended now that when psychiatrists have a new patient who has anxiety or depression, that they actually ask if the person uses cannabis, because it's so common. And then we have this really interesting syndrome that we're still trying to understand called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of this thing on the news where people are scromiting. Anyone heard of this? So essentially what this is, and I think I understand it, is basically when people use cannabis regularly, remember I mentioned how your brain's like a thermostat, it tries to respond to what you're putting in it? Cannabis, we don't quite understand exactly how it works in the brain, but the way I think of it is it kind of like cannabis turns up and down your sensitivity to kind of the things that your body's seeing and feeling. And with regular cannabis use, it's almost like you're more sensitive to the stuff around you when cannabis is out of your system and you're feeling withdrawal. And so it's really sad. These patients come to the ER, they're really hard to treat, and they're so nauseated that they almost kind of yell that they're hoping they vomit. And there's a doctor that called it scromiting. Like, you can always hear it across the ER. Truly, I'll be working a shift, I'll be like, oh, room 7 has cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. Truly, you can hear it from across the ER. So my teenager, I'm gonna see her later today, had this. Poor thing's been admitted in the hospital like 4 or 5 times already this month. I'm really hoping I can get her off of cannabis. Really hoping. She was using 90% THC. Before we leave cannabis, there's one other thing. So it's, and again, I'm sorry, I'm a huge geek. This is what I do for fun. It's really interesting to me that this level of THC doesn't happen naturally, okay? So this level of THC, this super high THC concentration, can only be done in a lab. In order to get the THC out, they have to basically take cannabis and then put in a bunch of chemicals to extract only the THC. What's interesting, again to me, is that when you do this, all the other chemicals stay behind. Remember I mentioned there's 400 different chemicals in cannabis? So when people use these really concentrated THC products, they don't get any CBD. All they get is the THC. And it turns out that in the brain, CBD and THC are meant to kind of even each other out. And we see a lot more mental health problems when people use pure THC. I don't know if you guys know what paranoia is, where this idea that like you're seeing things that aren't there, like you see a shadowy figure in the corner of the room, you feel like people are following you. We see a lot of paranoia with the really high potency THC products. Okay, if you've heard of greening out, that's overdosing on cannabis. Now the good news is, overdosing on cannabis is not nearly as dangerous as alcohol or fentanyl. It really doesn't affect your breathing. And as we'll learn about when we get to fentanyl, that is what makes overdoses dangerous when people stop breathing. But you've probably heard of this, like, hey, yeah, I think I greened out. Basically what this means is kind of like getting Nick sick. You consume enough cannabis that it makes you sick. What is greening out looking like? Usually it's one of two things in terms of how your brain's working. You're either completely panicked, paranoid, seeing things, hallucinating, or it makes you really sleepy. And we don't know yet why some people kind of panic and get paranoid and others fall asleep. We're still learning. And then it causes a lot of stomach problems, lots of vomiting. So it almost kind of looks like an alcohol poisoning, is that if you're partying tonight, you're partying this weekend, your friend's hitting some high potency THC vapes, and all of a sudden they get sleepy and vomit, they're probably greening out. Now, again, I mentioned that this is not as dangerous as fentanyl or alcohol, but I still don't think you should be babysitting them at home. If your friend is getting too sleepy to wake up and vomiting, they need to go to the hospital. And don't forget, when you call 911 for a friend who has a drug or alcohol-related emergency, you don't get in trouble. Good Samaritan law. Okay, questions on cannabis? All right, last we're going to go to the F word, fentanyl. When I started doing this, most of the students were like, what's fentanyl? Now I feel like y'all are pretty savvy. Most of the students I talk to have heard about fentanyl and kind of know what's going on. I'm going to hopefully give you a couple of pieces of information that you'll find useful. Okay, I don't think there's anything on here. All right, why is fentanyl a problem? Okay, so this is obviously a penny. This is the amount of fentanyl that will kill an adult. It is literally a few grains of sand. These vials you can see on the screen are 2 inches tall, about the size of your thumb. So heroin is an opioid. People have heard of heroin, it's in a lot of movies. These classes of medications that we're talking about are opioids. We usually use these for pain. I actually use fentanyl to treat my patients in the ER. I have to be really careful how I dose it. But again, for comparison to a penny, this is the amount of fentanyl that can kill an adult. This is the amount of heroin that can kill an adult. This is the amount of fentanyl that can kill an adult. And if you're wondering, it gets worse. This is carfentanil. This is actually not used on humans. It is used to tranquilize large mammals, like elephants. And it's here. A single grain, in the back you can't see this, but there is a single white grain right there, and that is the amount of carfentanil that can kill an adult. Some of my patients actually seek it out. They're like, hey man, you got any car? That's usually what it's referred to. We can talk about kind of what's happening next, but the drug market is just getting worse and worse. Let me explain the strength of fentanyl in another way. And just before I say anything, sugar packets are still okay. You can enjoy sugar. A couple of times I've mentioned this and folks are afraid they're going to get fentanyl in their sugar packet. No. I'm just telling you how strong fentanyl is, okay? So take a sugar packet, rip off the top, pour it out. Fill it up with fentanyl. That is enough for me to treat 40,000 patients. That is enough for a drug dealer to sell 40,000 doses on the street. And that is enough to kill 2,000 people. That's how strong it is. Now what's interesting is I think it was in October, Monterey Police Department down the street caught a dealer with 8 pounds of fentanyl. 8 pounds. That's enough to kill 2 million people. There's only 450,000 of us in Monterey County. I don't know who needs that much fentanyl. But the reason I bring that up is because there is so much fentanyl in the drug supply. Some of my patients buy 50 tablets of fentanyl a day. It is flooding the drug supply. And you can imagine, right? It's a sugar packet, and you can sell 40,000 doses on the street. Think how easy that is to smuggle. Okay, we're going to take just a quick minute here. I'm going to teach you how to respond to a fentanyl overdose. Okay, if you're partying this weekend, I hope this is useful. Actually, let me rephrase that. I hope you never need to respond to a fentanyl overdose. But if you're partying this weekend, you have knowledge that can save a life. So, opioids, remember I mentioned, cause breathing to stop. So each overdose on each drug class looks different, right? We talked about alcohol overdose. We talked about nicotine. We talked about cannabis. Fentanyl and other opioids look different when there's an overdose. What do we see? When fentanyl or another opioid is used, it directly acts on the part of the brain that controls breathing. And it makes the breathing stop. When a person stops breathing, you have 5 minutes before they get brain damage, and you get 8 minutes before their heart stops. Okay? Remember my friend Paul? He painted that painting I showed you? So he went 7 minutes without breathing after, he overdosed on an opioid. I loved the guy, but you could tell. That he got the, we'll talk about it in just a sec. He got Narcan, which is the life-saving medicine that reverses overdoses. He got it at minute 7 of his overdose. And like I said, I loved the guy. We'd go to coffee, but you could tell. He really couldn't make decisions. He couldn't hold a job. He couldn't really remember things. And I believe as a doctor that because he went 7 minutes without breathing during his overdose, it made it so he really couldn't respond to addiction treatment. And then ultimately, unfortunately, he died of his overdose. So, like I said, fentanyl and other opioids cause breathing to stop in overdose. What does that actually look like? You'll see essentially 2 big things. Number 1, the person is passed out. You go to wake them up, shake their shoulders, pinch their fingernails, pinch their skin. They do nothing. They do not respond at all. The second thing is they're not breathing, right? When people are sleeping, you can watch their chest move as they breathe. Something's not right. They're not breathing, they're drooling, something's not right. And then sometimes, not always, it makes people's pupils really small. So when you walk up and you see someone and they're confused and their pupils are really small, that might show signs that they're developing an opiate overdose. Thank goodness. We actually have a medicine that will wake someone up from an opiate overdose, including fentanyl. It's a bummer. It doesn't work on other drugs. Doesn't work on cannabis, doesn't work on alcohol, doesn't work on Xanax, doesn't work on nicotine, only opioids like fentanyl. So, what is it? Probably you guys heard of Narcan? Narcan, yeah, this is what Narcan is. I actually normally carry a dose in my backpack, but I gave it to someone yesterday who needed it. Oh, nice. You want to be my model and walk through? Yeah. So it's basically a little nasal spray. Looks like a little rocket ship. You put it in someone's nose and press the button. That's how easy it is. And this medicine is unbelievable. Let me tell you a story from the ER. So I'm working in the ER like 18 months ago, and they say, we need a doctor in the parking lot right now. And you can imagine that's never good, right? So I go running out to the parking lot, and there's a sedan. There's 4 people in it. There are 2 men staring straight ahead in the front seat. In the back left, there's a guy staring straight ahead. And in the back right, there is a man slumped over, and he's drooling and not responding. So one of our nurses, she came with me. She literally reaches into the back seat of the car through the open window and slides this into his nose and presses the button. And then one of our ER techs, who's awesome, I don't know how she did this, she literally ripped the car door open and ripped him out of the car and put him on our gurney. We go running into the ER as fast as we can, right? So we get into one of they're called resuscitation rooms. It's a big room for when someone's really sick. And I'll never forget, we were and the room is named Trauma Left. So we're in Trauma Left, and I noticed by the time we get there, about 60 seconds later, he's starting to breathe. Within about 2 minutes, he was starting to talk. And by 5 minutes, he was awake and acting normally. Like, it is unbelievable how much this medicine can save a life. And anyways, so we watched him in the ER for a few hours. I offered him some treatment for his addiction, and he went home. So we have this on campus. We give it out to families. As a citizen, I believe we all need to carry it. We get overdoses from Safeway. We get overdoses from Costco. We get overdoses from the sidewalk. Like, fentanyl's here. We all got to be ready to respond. So this is what Narcan is. If folks have specific questions, come chat with me afterwards. Okay, what does fentanyl look like? Unfortunately, fentanyl is very versatile, so it can look like many things. On the upper left, it's a powder. I usually ask my patients when I meet them, I'm like, hey, I'm Dr. Grover, let's talk through it. You know, what's your drug of choice? What do you use? And they'll be like, oh, I use fentanyl. And I'll usually ask, like, do you use powder? Do you use pills? How do you use it? So in the upper left, it's a white powder. In the middle, that's a Xanax bar. That's not Xanax, that's a fake. That's fentanyl. On the upper right, this one's really sneaky. Those are fake Tylenol. And that's fentanyl. Now, if you go to the drugstore and you buy a bottle of Tylenol and it's sealed, that's okay. This is someone trying to escape law enforcement. So when the cops show up, they're like, hey, it's Tylenol, it's okay. So that's a fake Tylenol that's actually fentanyl. On the lower left, for a while we were seeing this on the streets of Monterey, a pink powder. People called it pinky. In the middle, fentanyl we use at the hospital as a liquid in vials. And then down on the right, these are the blues. Some of my patients use 50 of these a day. People call them Oxy, Perks, Perk 30s, Oxy 30s, blues, whatever. Essentially, the ones on the lower right are the most common. Those, the cops seize those by the tens of thousands in Monterey County. Salinas PD last year had, I think, seized like 65,000 tablets in a single raid. So if you get a pill and it's not from a pharmacy, you can assume it has fentanyl in it. Like, that's just the reality of where we are in 2024 with drugs in Monterey. Okay, anyone heard of rainbow fentanyl? Yeah, this is rainbow fentanyl. So on the upper left, those are those blue M30 pills, but now they're made to look colorful. Okay, why are they doing this? The answer is they're trying to make fentanyl look less scary and look more fun. Like ecstasy for years gets pressed into these tablets that have like funny logos. People will buy ecstasy and it's got like Fred Flintstone pressed on it or the Batman symbol. There's kind of been this like party culture of pressed pills with different designs around ecstasy. But now we're seeing it with fentanyl as well. So those are basically fake oxycodone. Oxycodone is a prescription opioid. Those are fake oxycodone. Those contain fentanyl. On the lower right, that's from Monterey PD down the street. I think this was around the Lake El Estero area. They found someone who was selling, and basically you can see it looks like it's like a chalky substance. The officer said it looked like Lucky Charms marshmallows. So that's kind of what that material looks like. That's what rainbow fentanyl is. Okay, I don't know if people heard about this. Take a look at this. This is a Whoppers box with fentanyl in it. Just to be clear, if you go to a store, you buy Whoppers, the box is sealed, and you open it, and they look like Whoppers, they're Whoppers. Okay? This is somebody trying to escape law enforcement. So fentanyl is getting trafficked in candy boxes, in Lego boxes. I just want to be clear because I think it was last year, I was at middle school around Halloween, and all the kids were freaked out that they were going to get fentanyl in their Halloween candy. In fact, some of the students I talked to were like, I'm not going to eat any Smarties because it could be fentanyl, right? Those twisty ends, you can untwist them and retwist them. I have not heard of fentanyl showing up in candy, but this student was like, I'm not taking any risks. And think about it, right? Drug dealing is all about profit. Killing a 7-year-old on Halloween doesn't help them. So, but I bring this up because people hear rumors that fentanyl is in candy, and I just wanted to give you the best information I have. Okay, almost done here. We got about 6 minutes. Okay, let's say you want to use tonight. I need you to know some really important things about these counterfeit pills. Okay, if you go to a pharmacy and you buy a medicine and you break the pill in half, Half of the medicine is on the left, half is on the right. Believe it or not, the machines to mix the powders to make pills are expensive. They're like $30,000 to $50,000. Most people pressing fake pills are using blenders from like Target. Yes, truly, they use magic bullets to blend up the powders that go into these fake pills. So, remember I mentioned the blue M30s, those are the most common counterfeit pill I'm seeing. They get sold under the names of legitimate medicines, like Vicodin, or Norco, or Oxy, or Percocet, or Adderall. The problem is, when they're fake, they're not made well. So take a look at the schematic here, okay? The red dots represent the fentanyl. So this is a true story from the ER. So we had 4 students that were like, hey, I want to try a pill and I want to be smart. They decide that each of them would take a quarter pill. Okay? Here's my schematic based on what ended up happening. So, one student got essentially nothing. So that student took a quarter pill and felt nothing. They came up to the hospital, we watched them, that person was fine. One student got nearly all of the fentanyl. This student had an overdose, had to be treated with Narcan, and had to go to the hospital. Fortunately, he was okay. Someone gave him Narcan pretty fast. The last 2 students got a little bit of fentanyl. They felt kind of high. So even if you're like, hey, I'm going to be smart. Dr. Grover told me that these pills are fake, and you break it in half, you can't tell. Unfortunately, you can't tell based on what the pill looks like where the fentanyl is going to be. And unfortunately, it's estimated that anywhere from a quarter to a half of the counterfeit pills contain enough fentanyl to kill a person. There's more to the story. Let's say, again, you're going to party this weekend and your friend's like, hey man, I got a pill and I tested it. There's no fentanyl in it. Okay, how does that work? These are called fentanyl test strips. A lot of my patients use these because some of my patients don't want fentanyl, but yet they're still exposed to it. So how does this work? It's essentially a strip, it's about this long, and it's narrow, and basically you dip it in a liquid, and the liquid kind of goes up the strip like a COVID test, and it tells you, is there fentanyl or not? Which is great, right? If you know there's fentanyl, it's going to change the decision that you make. 2 problems. So I think these are great. I give them out to my patients, but I need you to know where they have limitations. Number 1, they don't tell you how much fentanyl. Is it a toxic amount? Is it a little bit? Who knows? Okay, second issue is if you shave off part of the pill, you missed the fentanyl. So in order to test a pill fully, you have to dissolve the whole pill in water and test all of the liquid. Well, you can imagine there's no pill left, so people don't want to waste them. So if you see an intact pill and someone says they tested it, they probably just shaved off a piece and you didn't actually find out what's really in the pill. We got 2 minutes left. I'm going to leave you with one last thing, is that I'm really worried about what's next. Fentanyl is not the worst thing that we're going to get. So this is a picture showing the fact that fentanyl is a chemical made in a lab and it's very easy to modify. This is, I think, 13 different chemical copies of fentanyl, and I'm starting to see them in my patients. I don't know what these do. Is one of them going to show up as the dominant drug in the supply soon? I don't know. I will be very honest. I'm lecturing at Monterey Fire next week on this very topic of what's next? And it's actually, unfortunately, it's not just opiates. People have heard of benzos like Xanax. We're seeing the same trend with benzos where basically kind of new chemicals are showing up all the time. And as doctors, we really don't know that much about them. Looks like we're out of time. Do you want to close?